Assalamu alaikum students, ladies and gentlemen. Today we will continue with the lecture that we were going through in the last session, which is basically related to the learning processes. We had discussed a number of learning theories and we had still to do a few more. And I had emphasized the importance of learning theory for marketers. Why? Because more or less all our actions related to strategy development, particularly in the area of advertising, is related to the thinking or the thought processes or the learning processes that customers normally undertake. And at that point of time, I'd already suggested to you too that while we will continue to learn these learning theories or study these learning theories, we will also like to look at certain marketing models or strategic marketing models to be able to bring them together, because unless you understand where these things will pool together or integrate, it becomes very difficult to understand the importance of any topic or subject. So while I am going to recapitulate whatever has been discussed up till now, then I will also try and introduce in the early stages those marketing models, so that once we have taken care of them, we will be left with basically two further models which are very important. One is related to cognitive theory or learning theory, and the second is involvement theory. These two are more significant because they have developed over a period of time from the very original theories that we have talked about. And try and understand that unless we try and remember how people think, how people learn, we will never be able to influence their thinking processes. And it is in this context that we have carried out a lengthy exercise of understanding these learning or consumer learning theories. Now, recall, we had discussed classical, which is, we have taken care of it. And we had said that the strategic implications were when we have products or brands and we carry out extensions, because one way or the other, these extensions automatically link together. Now, that is the reason. Second, we were discussing cognitive theory. Now, cognitive associative theory, if you mark the words, are very significant and will help you to learn and understand also. Cognition basically means thinking. And this is the difference between classical and this one. Learning theory in classical meant it's instinctive, but cognitive means we think. And associative means that we link two things together. And if you recall, we had unconditional and conditional stimulus where the things were associated and only then learning took place. Again, the implications were in terms of family branding, brands, extensions, line extensions, product extensions, licensing, and this is what we considered. Following that, we came into instrumental learning, where it was suggested that instrumental is when you experiment and the response satisfies you, and once you are satisfied with the response, you tend to learn that particular behavior. Now, obviously, there were certain implications, and those implications are specifically targeted towards advertising. We suggested that since repeated experiments must take place, we must be repeatedly given satisfaction. Therefore, the marketers have to be able to develop what you call positive experience, customer satisfaction. Therefore, we had to have certain kinds of reinforcements. Now, reinforcements can be of a number of ways and means. In the advertising case, we have reinforcements through positive influence being provided, or happiness or pleasure being created, whereas we discussed that negative reinforcement actually tries to lead you into a particular behavior, but it is composed of, let's say, fear, embarrassment, confusion, so on and so forth, which basically tried to explain the logic. And the logic was that one way or the other, we need to reinforce the activities that you believe the customer must perform. Now, we had discussed at that point of time that there is a difference between negative reinforcement and punishment. Again, just to recapitulate so that there is no confusion, Punishment is to stop a behavior, whereas negative reinforcement is to guide the behavior in a particular direction. So we had discussed this quite a lot. And therefore, the last part, which is more critical in terms of advertising, was that whatever reinforcements we have, there is a tendency that we forget. Either of the two things can happen. Either reinforcements can totally be lost because the reinforcement was not correct. It was negative constantly, the reinforcement that was coming in, rather than giving the logical end to the decision of the consumer or providing the basic expectation that the consumer had. Repeatedly, if this happens, the reinforcement will get extinct. One will finish off. Once it finishes off, the link between the stimulus and the response will also break. Now, therefore, there was an issue of how to maintain this positive kind of a reinforcement going on, which basically means that you have to keep the person's attention on the area of response and stimulus. Now, in advertising, stimulus is basically the message that you create or the fact that you provide certain images to them, which keeps reinforcing the fact. Now, what happens basically is that there are two types of changes that can be brought into the advertising images or whatever you have. One is what we call cosmetic, and the other is substantive, which means cosmetic may what you can do is that the message remains the same, the model changes, or the location changes. But when we call substantive, then substantive normally means that we really bring out a new information framework for the same brand. Some new attribute is targeted. By this consistent targeting new attributes, you are constantly reinforcing the consumer's point of view in terms of that the product has certain relevant attributes which he feels are close to associated with himself. Now, therefore, we had been talking about how to avoid this extinction. On the other side, we had the concept of forgetting. Now, forgetting basically targets into the idea that a person may have not gone back again to the reinforcing process and might have ultimately forgotten that there was something that existed. Now, for that, what we call reminder ads are developed, or reminder ads are put into position so that the person can remind himself of some association between the stimulus and the response. But what researchers have concluded, and that is very, very critical, and that conclusion is that whatever you do, these things do not have an impact unless and until the relationship between the product and the consumer is developed strongly. Now, when we talk about this association between the consumer and the product, or the response that the customer, the marketer wants, we need to be able to develop certain relationships. Now, that is why over a period of time, customer relationship marketing has become, or what we call CRM, has become very, very significant. Why? Because at this point of time, we are trying to develop very strong loyalties and associations. Please remember also that when a person becomes overly loyal to a product, then if anything goes wrong, he will be more dissatisfied and will be hurt to the extent that he will never get back to the product or the response that you wanted from him. Therefore, when we are building these loyalties, it has to be ensured that the quality or whatever was offered is consistent and exceeds the customer's interest or requirements, because that will be what will reinforce. If you fall below that and a person has become very loyal and trusty of your product, then he will suffer very significant emotional throwback. And if that happens, he is bound to reject not only that product, but anything to do with that brand or that system. So we have to be very careful in doing that. Further, we discussed on reinforcement schedules. Now, the reason why we were talking about reinforcement was, as discussed earlier, that there is this extension or there is this forgetting. So we need to be able to make sure that this extension doesn't finish off, or forgetting does not take place. So we need to continuously bring the awareness to the person, and he is reminded of the product or the brand. Now, schedules were of three types that we discussed. Number one was that you give it totally. Every time the person goes, he is provided with a particular extra that he may like. Second was when we talked about ratio, which means, let's say, after 3 days, or after every 3 products that he buys, or after every 100 customer, something which is definitely ratio involved. That, I mean, for example, if the examples that I gave you were that perhaps you collect coupons. When you purchase a product, there are coupons on it. You collect those coupons, and after, let's say, 6th or 7th coupon collected, you can go and redeem that coupon and get the product free. And the same is the case with if you buy 3 and you get 1 free, and so on and so forth. These reinforcement procedures are induced so that the customer can repeatedly come to you for that product. And normally, coupons, loyalty, cards, mileages, all these are what we call ratios. For example, in airline system, you fly, you get points for every mile that you cover. And at a point of time, let's say after 17,000 flying miles, you might get a total ticket free for a particular destination. All these are forcing the consumer to repeatedly go into the response that you desire, and that is purchase. Finally, we have another concept, which is random or variable. Now, variable reinforcement is that the customer does not know when he will be rewarded. So that gives him an incentive to keep trying. The idea is that the person will keep trying because there is a substantial award at the back of all these reinforcement efforts. So we had discussed instrumental learning. In this context, we had therefore discussed 2 distinct learning processes. One is called the mass learning, and the other is called the continuous learning. Now, or distributed learning. Now, mass learning relates to when the media or the advertising is offered in a major single time frame, and you find repeated ads coming in. What is being suggested here is that the impact of all these ads, which are coming repeatedly, will have a major impact on the consumer's reinforcement or learning process. Second concept is what we discussed in terms of distributed learning, where the ads are spread over a period of time. Now, these two, in the instrumental case, we had been discussing the logic of the scheduling of reinforcement. And here we have another concept, which is in terms of learning from mass kind of advertising concept or distributed. If you combine these two, significantly what is suggested is that if you want to bring a short-term impact, then mass advertising becomes important, which means it is confined to a distinct time frame. But if you want to develop learning over a period of time, then it is much better to create distinctive or distributed learning. Now, if you look at both the ends, we should be able to put them together in some form. And at this point, I had suggested that I will discuss the ends of growth model so that we can understand from strategic point of view where we started, that everything leads into how to develop strategies. So we need to have a context of strategy in front of us. Now, for this purpose, if you look at the screen, you will see a model which is also known as the growth matrix. The author of this model was Enzov, and every marketing book has this model which suggests how you can carry out marketing strategy for certain purposes. Now, if you watch this model carefully, you will see that on one side we have the product, and on the x-axis we have market. And there are 4 distinct blocks, or what you call grids. Now, these 4 grids are old and new. And if you look at the old and old, which means basically that the product is old and the market is also old. So whatever strategy you apply at this point of time is to be able to penetrate the market in a very extensive manner. Now, link up with the mass concept, and you will be able to see that normally when the attempt is to penetrate the market very strongly, people normally tend to use mass learning concept and put the advertising effort in a short period of time. And obviously, there are other aspects of the P's, the 4 P's, that is price and placement, and also the distribution channel and the kind of product is related. But the logic is that with mass learning, a short, heavy dose of advertising would be able to generate the kind of penetration you want or the response you want. Now, look at the other areas. For example, the old and new market development, the old product, which is being positioned into a new market. Now, simple logic would suggest that even though at the initial stage, if you want to penetrate the market in the very beginning, you will carry out mass, but if you want to develop the market over a period of time, then you will have to move towards distributed learning system or distributed advertising, which is based on the concept of distributed learning. The idea, again, if you now look at these two blocks where penetration and market development is considered, it becomes very clear how the two can be used from the learning processes. So we have been able to look at it from that angle. But if you look at the product development, now it's another concept which moves in. Obviously, all these concepts are there, strategies have to be developed, and one of the major strategies is related to advertising. Now, not only advertising, but the number of times the advertisement will be displayed. Now, we were then also interested in another model, which is called the modeling or observational learning model. Now, what is being suggested here is that instead of trial and error, what people tend to do is watch. They watch other people using a particular product and seeing what the response they are receiving, and based on that, then they develop their own behaviors. We see this tendency among children, for example. Children watch their elders, watch their elder brothers and sisters, and whatever products normally give or what they believe is giving good response to their own elder brothers and sisters who have used that product. So the tendency of theirs will be to move towards that product buying. The same concept is also applied in opinion leaders. If you remember, in marketing, we have somebody who are known as opinion leaders. Now, a little bit more on opinion leaders and how they are used in advertising, then these two things will become more clearer because people tend to observe opinion leaders. Opinion leaders normally belong to particular products and they exist throughout the society. Opinion leader, for example, if you want to buy a computer, you will tend to go to a person who is more experienced, more knowledgeable about computers, and you watch what he's bought and what he suggests. Now, this basically is a link between how people observe things, and what we basically get is our desire to go and get the same kind of response as the opinion leader or somebody else is getting, who they are looking at. And in the advertising, if we look at, we see the use of models, particularly, is very critical. Now, the use of model is, for example, we look at lady with very shiny hair, and therefore the ladies would try, who want to have that kind of shiny hair, will tend to follow the person's approach. If the person is happy, expresses satisfaction, they will tend to therefore go into a similar kind of behavior. Another example would be that if a person sees a young man who's smart, who's handsome, healthy, and he's seen eating a particular brand of cereal or a particular brand of product, he will tend to try and become that same person and eat the same product. Therefore, there is a rationale in this modeling or observational learning process. But also try and remember that there is a strong relationship between this observational learning and instrumental learning, because instrumental learning was how your response is satisfying to you. And in terms of observation learning, you are actually watching somebody else getting that satisfaction, but there is a direct relationship between reinforcement. Now, also remember that all learning does not mean that you have to experiment. All learning does not come from trial and certain other methods. A major theory which has now been moved into marketing is that all people tend to learn through a thinking and problem-solving process. So this new theory that has come into position, or which is becoming quite popular, is basically related to the idea that there is a complex process of thinking takes place. Now, compare this model with the previous model that we talked about in classical learning, which was a very simple, instinctive model. But here what is being suggested is, other than observational and all the others that we have discussed, like instrumental, that a person goes through a process of thinking. And in this problem-solving process of thinking, he has to go through a number of steps. And these steps, for example, we have discussed is, first we discussed problem recognition. Problem recognition, if you recall the lectures that we had on needs or motivations and so on and so forth, ego, esteems, all these helped us to recognize a problem. And the problem is that there is a deprivation, there is a gap between what we want and gap between what we have. Now, this gap is part of the new theory, which I've just mentioned to you, and this is called cognitive theory. Now, cognitive theory basically, therefore, focuses totally on the thinking and problem-solving process belonging to an individual. It is distinctive. It's very distinctive from the cognitive associated learning that we talked about earlier. There we said thinking and association between two stimulus or variables. Here what we are talking about in terms of learning is that there is a process which is undertaken by individuals who want to come to a solution, and the solution will always be to fill the gap. And the gap is between what is needed and what is existing. Now, obviously, therefore, there are a few parts of this model, and I will compare this model with the other models that I mentioned to you in terms of marketing, so that we can have a comprehensive view of the various models that we discuss and how they are applied. Now, in cognitive learning, the basic model is that we have to have a problem recognition. We then search for information, we gather information about our problem, then we carry out evaluation among the various alternatives we have. Finally, we make a decision, and that decision is obviously purchase decision that we were looking at. Now, to make sure that we understand these processes, we have to understand how does a person gather, collect, retrieve information, because obviously we have discussed the issue of problem recognition, but the major problem that we need to have in this model is the concept of how does an individual gather information, and not only gather information, but how does he process information. Now, this information gathering and processing has two implications. One is the ability of the individual himself to be able to process complicated information sets. Second is the complexity of the information itself. Now, these are 2 points which we need to be very clear about, because if we try and send information to a person who does not have the knowledge or the background information or even capability, that information is going to be lost. On the other side, unless and until if a person is really knowledgeable and he is not given the correct amount of information about a particular product, then what will happen is that he will not be able to relate the information with his prior knowledge. Now, इसमें दो चीजें अब शामिल हो गई. One is that there is prior information resting somewhere in the memory. और ये जो नई information आ रही है, if it is not locking in with the old information, there will be a problem. So the old information जो है, वो ब्लॉक करती है न्यू इंफॉर्मेशन फ्लो को. सो वी हैव टू बी वेरी केयरफुल अबाउट सीइंग कि पहले जो इंफॉर्मेशन दी गई थी या all the old advertising that had been conducted, there is a rational link between the two. Second issue is that the new information will block the old information being retrieved. Why? Because whenever you want to go through a process, the process has these 3 points. One, पहले तो वो store होती है, फिर उसके ऊपर repetition होगी, unless and until it is repeated, it will not be placed in your memory. And then you need to bring that information forth, यानी कि उसको लाना पड़ेगा, so that there is a relationship created. Now, this we will discuss when we try and understand how the brain tries to manage this information flow. But इस वक्त जो जरूरी चीज़ है वो ये है कि जो knowledge create होती है cognitive learning के अंदर, उसमें two things become very critical. One is the ability of the individual himself. The second is the major complexity of the information that is flowing. And we must also remember that this will then link up with a concept we call, let's say, like we talked about the kind of products. अब convenience product जो हैं, उसमें complexity की ज़रूरत नहीं है, because they are simple products that we repeatedly buy. But अगर हम shopping या specialty goods की बात करते हैं, particularly shopping goods की, जहां comparisons होते हैं, वहां अगर complex information नहीं दी जाएगी, the purchase decision will not be in favor of your own product if you have not been able to provide enough information. Therefore, like I'm saying, it is not dependent only on the consumer whose ability is being challenged for information. It is also the complexity of the information, and it's also the kind of product that we are trying to market. Now, having understood that, we need to understand also that जिस शख्स के पास एक प्रोडक्ट की इंफॉर्मेशन या नॉलेज है and he is more aware of this whole knowledge, तो उसको अगर आप थोड़ी इंफॉर्मेशन देंगे, he will not be satisfied because his experience is very rich, so he can assimilate a lot of new information coming in. On the other side of the picture, what we need therefore is a particular model which is relevant in terms of advertising. And if you recall, in the advertising model, we used to have something we call the AIDA model, AIDA. And if you see the screen, you will be able to see that this model, which is also very relevant to marketing and is particularly related to advertising, creates attention. Obviously, it attracts attention. It creates interest. It creates a desire. And then finally, it creates action. This is normally what we use in the advertising factors. But we have to link it up with the cognitive theory, where it says that information that is provided should be enough to be able to attract attention. And like I said, if the a person's knowledge is very extensive, he has knowledge of all the other products that are available, and you give him very generalized knowledge or very generalized information, you will not be able to capture his interest. And if you cannot capture his interest, obviously you would have lost the person's attention towards your product. On the other side of the picture, look at the other person who has less capability to process information. And again, if you have provided extensive information to this person who lacks the ability to process high level of information, he will immediately lose interest. अब होगा क्यों? Because अगर कोई चीज उसकी समझ में नहीं आ रही, आप उसको कितना भी खूबसूरत तरीके से पेश करें, the person will lose interest in that information. And once you cannot create interest, logic में desire create करना और फिर उसको action में ले जाना becomes more or less an impossibility. Therefore, the application of the cognitive thinking or learning is directly related to the models that have been developed by marketers. And one such model is what I've just mentioned to you, which is also known as the promotional model, which relates to how advertising must take place. Or logic, dobara dohra दूं, is that a person who has high knowledge, large knowledge, is extensive with number of products in the know-how of the person and attributes and so forth, उसको अगर आप थोड़ी information अपने product के हवाले से देंगे, he will immediately lose interest in the product. On the other side, which is totally contradictory to this, which relates to a person's ability in terms of he cannot process that level of information, और आप उसको provide कर दें तो वो interest lose कर जाता है. अगर आप गौर करें, this is normally what we also see in the classrooms. For example, a person who has studied a particular course very extensively, और वो एक क्लास में जाता है जहां वही information दोबारा repeat हो रही है, so what we will do is he will lose interest in that information. Conversely, अगर किसी क्लास के अंदर जो स्टूडेंट्स की कैपेबिलिटी है, आप उससे ज़्यादा इंफॉर्मेशन फ्लो शुरू हो जाए और कम्प्लेक्स इंफॉर्मेशन आए, पर्टिकुलरली हम देखते हैं कि ये जो क्वांटिटेटिव सब्जेक्ट्स होते हैं उनमें ये चीज़ यू नोट इट रिपीटेडली अगेन एंड अगेन, कि जब वहाँ इंफॉर्मेशन ज़्यादा दी जाए, उसकी कैपेसिटी टू इंटरप्रेट और प्रोसेस द इंफॉर्मेशन, the person will immediately lose interest in that information. Same thing applies here, and this is why we call it cognitive learning, which is very related not only to the marketing and advertising, but to our daily regular knowledge creation and regular lifestyles. Okay, the second model that we have is what we call the decision-making model. Now, again, this decision-making model is one that we are more concerned with. This model actually relates to creating awareness. You get aware of the product. We have just discussed it in the beginning. And obviously, then you create knowledge, you evaluate, and then you come to a purchase framework. So we have already discussed that, so I will leave it. But this, you must remember, is the second model, which is related to decision making. But the third one, which is also very relevant, and it is here that I talked to you about product development. If you recall, just a few seconds or minutes back, and you can see it on the board again, we had talked about the hands-off growth model. We had discussed two particular strategic options that we have. One was penetration, the other was market development. And in that case, we had discussed the impact of mass advertising or mass learning as against distributed learning. But now we are moving into the product development area. Now, obviously, in the hands-off model, there is product development as one strategy where a new product is brought into position in an old market that you are already working with. You are already within the market segment, you know the market well, but you are launching a new product. Now, if you link it up with this innovation adoption model, you will be able to understand where the differences are and how they integrate in the consumer learning theory. For example, in this case, we have again awareness, we have interest, we have evaluation, and then we have trial. Now, the difference between decision-making model and adoption process model is because here a new product is being tried, therefore trial will take place. और अगर ये trial की reinforcement नहीं होती and instrumental learning का जो concept हम देख रहे थे, that does not occur where the person is going to try and he is not getting the kind of response that he wants, what will happen is he will lose interest in that product. But if on a try he likes the product, he will obviously go into evaluation and then he will become solidly linked with that particular product or brand. इसी के लिए हमने जिक्र किया था कि to be able to induce this, normally what companies do, for example, car dealers जो हैं, internationally what they do is a new model comes into position because it's a new model with new innovations. You normally offer it for a test drive. और अगर आप देखें with consumer, fast moving consumer goods, तो normally क्या होगा, किसी पुराने product के साथ एक नया sachet दे दिया जाएगा to try it. Many people have done it with launching new brands of new what do you call tea extension. चाय के लिए एक नया पैकेट दे दिया गया. For example, you are buying a company's cereals, तो उसके साथ soup का पैकेट दे दिया गया. So and so forth. The idea is that you are inducing a trial for a new brand or a new product or a product extension. All these things are logically linking up in the consumer learning behavior, and that is why these models have been developed. Now, once we have discussed these models, we now want to look at the basic information processing system in a brain. इसके लिए we would like to go into a little bit of biology, but not so extensively, but we need to understand how these things work. We should understand that at the beginning, we have senses. Now, what happens is that these senses, they receive information. जो information आती है, they do not come in a comprehensive, overall, holistic picture. पूरी picture के तौर पे नहीं आती. What happens is that the information comes in small bits and pieces, and immediately they arrive in the brain, the pictures are put together, or these information is put together, और एक picture create करने की कोशिश की जाती है. अब this is where the memory is, the brain is started working. और ये जो brain के काम है, ये senses से आते हैं, they are very very short term oriented. few seconds के अंदर information आई, picture बनी, and the information flow. अगर आप जरा example देखें, if you're traveling on a road, so when you're driving, there are number of cars passing, you become split second aware of a car passing you, but immediately you have moved ahead, the car has gone out of your mind, it's lost, the information is gone. Same is the case with all the pictures that you try and see along the way that you are going. You can see hills, then you see grassland, you see forests, but as you pass, the information is constantly getting lost to you. Why? Because this, senses which are receiving information are there for very short term, unless there is something very interest generating in it. अगर उसमें कोई interest नहीं है, कोई खास चीज नहीं है, so you will keep passing. For example, इसी तरह pass करते हुए, if suddenly you see a group of people standing near two cars, immediately the information is triggered off because this is of interest, this is interesting, why are this group standing there, and your mind starts processing this information. तो होता क्या है कि इस senses से अगर few seconds के अंदर उसमें interest create नहीं होता, तो ये चीज lost हो जाएगी. Otherwise, if the interest is created, this will move into what we call the short-term store. And the short-term store basically is where all the work takes place. Normally, short-term में जो information है, वो कुछ seconds, कुछ minutes के लिए रहती है. But उसमें भी problem ये है कि अगर उसको हम process और नहीं करें, so then that also will be lost from our short-term memory. इसीलिए we have what we call basically a question of rehearsal. और ये आप note करेंगे, whenever you go out and you are driving, try and note this. अगर कोई interesting चीज होगी तो आपका ज़हन, without your recognizing the fact, is repeating the information to yourself. This information is done very silently. अगर वो information एक दो दफा repeat की जाए अपने ज़हन में, तो फिर वो हमारे long term memory store में चली जाती. ये जो long term memory है, ये वो जगह है जहां जितनी भी associations हैं, वो एक हमारी जो environment है उसके हवाले से एक picture बनाती चली जाती हैं, which we keep in store for long period of time. Years तक ये information हमारे साथ रहती है. But the issue is in the way the short term memory works. अब ये short term memory जो है, उसका ये जो concept है, ये बड़ा critical है. और ये हमारी education में भी हम note करते हैं. वो क्या कि teachers जो हैं, वो normally अगर किसी बच्चे को पढ़ा रहे हैं, तो फिर उसको repeat करने के लिए कहा जाता है उसी sentence को बार बार. मकसद क्या है कि ये जो information उसने देखी है बोर्ड के ऊपर, अगर वो repeat करेगा, तो फिर it will transfer in towards the long term memory, and that is what is commonly done. इसी तरह से ये advertising का भी issue यही है. Advertising आए और अगर आप advertising के साथ उसके jingle को या उसके wordings को अगर आप repeat करें, तो that goes into your long term memory. But on the other side, अगर वो information आपके सामने आई, interesting भी थी, लेकिन आपके जहन ने उसके ऊपर repetition कोई भी नहीं की, तो वो information immediately lose कर जाते हैं. तभी in marketing हम बहुत कोशिश करते हैं एडवर्टाइजिंग में ख़ास तौर पे कि जिंगल्स या यूनिक वर्ड्स या ऐसी चीज़ें इस्तेमाल की जाएं जो इंसान को फोर्स करें उन चीज़ को रिपीट करने में। और जब रिपीट होती है तो ये फिर इंफॉर्मेशन लूज नहीं होती, ये लॉन्ग टर्म में जाके ट्रांसफ़र हो जाती है और लॉन्ग टर्म में से फिर इंफॉर्मेशन जो है हम अब इस्तेमाल करते हैं ओवर ए पीरियड ऑफ टाइम। नाउ अगेन रिमेंबर दैट व्हेन वी आर डिस्कसिंग दिस लॉन्ग टर्म एसोसिएशन एंड शॉर्ट टर्म्स, वी नीड टू बी वेरी क्लियर कि रिहर्सल कैसे इफेक्ट करती है हमारे ट्रांसफ़र को। नाउ रिहर्सल जो है वो जितनी ज़्यादा रिपीट की जाएगी उतनी ज़्यादा उसकी जो है ट्रांसफरिंग होगी इन दी लॉन्ग टर्म मेमोरी में। और लॉन्ग टर्म मेमोरी के अंदर ये जो इंफॉर्मेशन है ये डायरेक्टली वहाँ जाके नहीं बैठती। होता ये है कि देयर इज़ सम इनकोडिंग दैट टेक्स प्लेस। अगर आपने कंप्यूटर्स देखा हो तो कंप्यूटर्स में भी इंफॉर्मेशन को इनक्रिप्ट किया जाता है या इनकोड किया जाता है और वो इंफॉर्मेशन जो आप देखते हैं या पढ़ते हैं वो वही इंफॉर्मेशन नहीं है जो कंप्यूटर की मेमोरी में ऑपरेट कर रही है। तो यही हालत, it is same with our own brains. What we do is that we assign some symbols, some images to this information. और ये symbols और ये information जब हम उसको assign करते हैं तो ये symbol और ये जो words हैं या जो अल्फाज हैं, they are the ones which actually represent the object. ऑब्जेक्ट खुद हमारे जहन में नहीं होता लेकिन उसके मुतालिक कोई इमेज, कोई पिक्चर, कोई वर्ड, कोई ऐसी चीज़ जिसको हम इमेज में क्रिएट कर सकें वो स्टोर होती है। और इसी की वजह से जब हमें कोई क्यू मिलता है तो ये जो एसोसिएशंस हैं यानी कि जो हमारे माइंड में द इंफॉर्मेशन दैट हैज़ बीन स्टोर्ड इन द शेप ऑफ वेरियस इमेजेस, तो विद द हेल्प ऑफ द क्यू, एंड व्हाट इज अ क्यू व्हिच वी हैड ऑलरेडी डिस्कस्ड अर्लियर इन आवर लेक्चर्स is a pointer. So when we look at a pointer, all these images come together in terms of what we say associations, and that association brings forth a complete comprehensive picture that we want to recall, and we recall that, which is also now I'm using a word, I would rather that you try and understand this word, but it's more technical. But associations को अगर हम कहें कि एक पिक्चर बन जाती है, इट्स मच बेटर, अदरवाइज वी कॉल इट स्कीमा। नाउ आपने कभी देखा होगा मैकडोनल्ड का वो एम है, ये क्यू है। द मिनट यू सी द एम, it does not recall just the M, but it recalls all the associations if you are aware, and if you have in your long-term memory उसके हवाले से बहुत सी associations आपकी linked हैं because you have used it, you've been there, you know exactly the layouts कैसा होगा, you also know how you will be able to order that food, what kind of food you can expect, हैं, chips हैं, French fries हैं, whatever they are. But when you see the M model, all these associations in terms of a schema comes to you. और ये उसका प्रोसेस है जो बैकग्राउंड इंफॉर्मेशन जो है क्यू को देखते ही ये आपके फोरग्राउंड मेमोरी में आती है और वहाँ से हमारी क्या नाम है एक्शन या व्हाटएवर आवर डिसीजंस विल स्टार्ट। Now, we must understand that the degree of prior knowledge is very critical in retention. So, when we understand how the information is stored, we should also understand how the information will be retained and then retrieved. Now, in retention, we have to be very careful because when we are providing advertising, when we are providing experience to the customer, when we are creating images, when we are working with the service industry, where actually अगर आप गौर करें तो सर्विस इंडस्ट्री के अंदर प्रोडक्ट इस्तेमाल करने के बाद सेटिस्फैक्शन आती है, लेकिन उनका प्रॉब्लम ये है कि दे हैव टू कन्विंस द कंज्यूमर टू बाय द प्रोडक्ट एंड दे हैव टू डू इट बाय मेकिंग द intangible into something tangible, and that is what we also call shaping the behavior or learning process. ये जो retention है, we have to be very clear that the stronger the knowledge, prior knowledge, and the stronger the relationship or relevance between the knowledge and the consumer's own requirements, the stronger the retention would be. Finally, अब ये कैसे store होती है, उसके भी दो तीन तरीके हैं, and you will be able to see that normally it happens in your life, but we need to now recognize कि life में जो चीज़ें without our awareness होती हैं, there is a logic behind it. And there are two methods by which this information is retained or we retain the information. एक तो है episodically, which basically means that it is related to time series. जो चीज़ आपने मिसाल के तौर पे आपको याद आ सकता है कि सैटरडे को हमने खाना खाया, दैट इज एपिसोडिकल, दैट मीन्स अ टाइम फ्रेम्ड इशू. और आपने देखा होगा कंप्यूटर्स भी कई दफ़ा आपसे जब इंफॉर्मेशन को वो रखने की कोशिश करते हैं तो वो पूछ लेते हैं कि ये टाइम से रखना है तो व्हाटएवर इज ओल्डर पहले रखा जाए या जो चीज़ नहीं आ रही है वो बाद में रखी जाए या पहले रखी जाए. सेम थिंग इज डन इन द ब्रेन. सो एपिसोडिकली वी टॉक अबाउट as the information comes in sequentially over a time period. दूसरा है semantically. When we talk about semantic, what we are discussing is concept. So या तो information concept के हवाले से होती है या time के हवाले से है. In both the cases, we try and store this information on these two grounds. For example, जैसे मैं कह रहा था Saturday को you might have gone to a restaurant. So you remember, let's say a week back, that you had gone to a restaurant on a Saturday, और ये information time के साथ है. फिर वहाँ आपने क्या खाया या क्या वहाँ आपका जो whatever your experience is consolidated in terms of semantic, which is conceptual. Now, when these two things happen, we are clear of the retention problem. But now in the final stage today, we will discuss a little bit on retrieval, so that we are more clear as to the process of information flow and how it takes place and what is the way we come to a solution to our problems. Next class, maybe we will try and look at the final theory, which is basically involvement, and that is very significant because it links up with a number of products and related to a number of concepts. And finally, we will try and measure these, the retention or retrieval issues, which is very important from the point of view of research. But let's get back to the retrieval. Now, it is very clear that cues bring information from the long-term memory to the place where we start operating on that memory, which is in the short-term store. It has been suggested by a number of people that ये जो retrieval है, इसमें for the purposes of marketing, it is more important that people try and look at benefits and not attributes or number of information. Example hai, if I said that this computer speed is, let's say, 3.2 gigahertz. Now, people may not remember this because it is more difficult to retrieve this information in specific numbers. However, it is easy to say that the computer has very high speed, और इसका जो processing speed है वो बहुत high है. Now, one is a benefit, the other is a particular attribute. An attribute is actually when you specify certain things. For example, a motorcycle does 40 kilometers in a liter. This is information. Benefit है that it is low in consumption, fuel consumption. So what people tend to say is, another example is कि ये क्या नाम है आपका जो एयर कंडीशन है ये 16 डिग्री तक टेम्परेचर गिरा सकता है. बट ऑन द अदर साइड इफ वी सेड दैट द एयर कंडीशनर मेक्स द रूम कंफर्टेबल, इट गिव्स यू अ बेनिफिट. सो रिट्रीवल में इंफॉर्मेशन क्यूज के थ्रू रिट्रीव होती हैं एंड दे कम आउट एज अ होल स्कीमा. Number two, it is easy to retrieve benefits than attributes. This is very significant from the point of view when we discuss the marketing concept. Okay. Now, at the end, therefore, we have already discussed more or less all the related learning theories. We have also covered the implications of those theories. One is left, which is involvement theory, which is very significant as it is a developmental process of marketing thought, which has brought us from the classical to the involvement theory. And involvement theory का जो direct link है, वो type of product से है, buying products से, convenience है, shopping, and similarly we have specialty goods. तो उससे हम link करेंगे और फिर finally we will try and measure what this, how to understand how much learning has taken place in a consumer. और उसी सेक्शन में then we will start the new area of knowledge which is basically कि कंज्यूमर के एटीट्यूड्स बनते कैसे हैं और कंज्यूमर के एटीट्यूड्स हाउ डू दे फॉर्म, हाउ डू दे चेंज, बिकॉज हमने एक इंफॉर्मेशन तो आ चुकी है हाउ इंफॉर्मेशन फ्लो टेक्स प्लेस, हाउ लर्निंग टेक्स प्लेस, but now we need to say how attitudes actually change, and therefore we need to understand how the change in the attitudes take place and what the marketer should do to be able to bring about the change in direction of their own products. Finally, just to conclude on this, एक चीज याद रखिएगा, जो motivated consumers होते हैं, they are more involved in the search information and processing of information. And like I said, this will be the subject that we will take up in the next class. Thank you very much. Allah Hafiz.